Welcome back to day 4 of the Joint Select Committee into Coercive Control. We have our next witnesses by telephone link, so thank you for joining us. If I can ask, do you have an oath or affirmation, the words of those in front of you?
Yes, we do.
Mr. Andresen, can I ask you to state your name, your title, and take either the oath or affirmation?
My name is Greg Andresen, and I'm the Senior Researcher with the 1 in 3 campaign. I, Gregory Andresen, do hereby affirm and declare that the evidence I shall give before this committee to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bennett, do you have the oath or affirmation?
Yes, I've got the affirmation. I, Craig Bennett, am a survivor, victim survivor of domestic abuse. I, Craig John Bennett, do hereby affirm and declare that the evidence I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your written submission, which committee members have before them, and we have had the opportunity to read that. We thank you for providing that to the committee and for considering our terms of reference. Before I start, for anybody listening or watching the webcast, if any of the evidence you hear today raises issues for you, you can contact 1800-RESPECT on 1800 737 732, and for confidential advice, support and referrals related to domestic and family violence, the New South Wales Domestic Violence Line can be contacted on 1800 656 463, or the Men's Referral Service on 1300 766 491. Thank you very much. Would you like to, either of you, make a short opening statement before you take questions from committee members?
Yes, Mr. Andresen here. I will go first, and then I believe Mr. Bennett also has something to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andresen. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to assist the inquiry today on behalf of the 1 in 3 campaign. As the Senior Researcher with 1 in 3 and the author of our submission, I'm familiar with the body of research about male victims of family violence. Mr. Bennett is a male victim/survivor who is available to provide you with a personal perspective on some of the issues you're wrestling with in this inquiry. We're both volunteers and we're not legal practitioners, so we don't possess an in-depth knowledge of the law. We do not take a position on whether coercive control should be criminalised. The arguments for and against such a proposal are equally compelling, and we don't envy the difficult task you have ahead of you. However, whatever recommendations the committee ends up making, we would urge that any new restrictions be applied equally to all victims of domestic and family violence, whatever their gender or other demographic particulars. Many male victims already lack the range of support services that are available to other victims and already face extra barriers to seeking support, as we have detailed in our submission. They frequently report being misidentified by police as the primary perpetrators because of their gender. As such, we are concerned at proposals such as 6.18 and 9.10 in the discussion paper that suggest training of police and other frontline services should recognise the gendered nature of coercive control. We agree that statistically women are more likely to be affected than men. However, enough men are affected that police and other services should always make decisions on the basis of the evidence before them and not on the basis of gender. To do so would only serve to marginalise male victims further. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, and can I ask if you'd be happy to forward a written copy of your opening statement to the committee for the assistance in Hansard? Thank you.
I'm happy to do that.
All right, terrific. Mr. Bennett, did you want to make an opening statement to the committee?
Yes, sure. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you okay, thank you.
Yeah. I, Craig Bennett, was married at the age of 30 to a single mum of 3 boys. She was of Italian descent, so born in Australia. Her mother disapproved of her marrying a skippy, which were her words. We went on to have 2 sons between us. She was very hot-headed, and I was constantly on tenterhooks. Though we went to pre-marriage counselling on the way from our honeymoon, she told me it was time for me to change and she was going to change me. Nothing was ever good enough in our marriage. In October 2007, I collapsed at work with viral encephalitis. I was hospitalised for 2 months and had to relearn to walk and talk, eat and performing basic tasks such as using a knife and showering. I was released from hospital just before Christmas and we went shopping with me in a wheelchair. I asked if I could have some money to get the kids some presents. Her reply was, a real man wouldn't be begging his wife for money, but would be out working instead of being a lazy XYZ laying flat on your back for 2 months doing nothing. This was to be the beginning of a journey of physical, verbal, spiritual, financial and emotional abuse. I was denied a shower chair because real men don't sit in the shower. I would have to sit on the shower floor and crawl out and hoist myself up on the toilet to stand up. I was sitting there and say, why don't you do everyone a favour and kill yourself? She would refer to me as a big bad daddy to the kids because I was too lazy to work. She would sharpen knives in the kitchen, saying one day she would stab me if I didn't go back to work. I had started a commercial cleaning business and had worked a second job on the dairy farm. I've always been interested in writing and I won a competition to write a chapter for a book. The main author would write the intro and concluding chapter. On a Saturday morning I was due to sit and write the chapter. She came into the study gloating she had cancelled the internet because who did I think I was to win a competition and be published in a book? I lost all my emails and online contacts that morning. I was to be slapped and punched, spat on, told that even my family wanted nothing to do with me. Can you imagine my horror when I rang New South Wales Doc's domestic abuse hotline and was told by the lady there I wasn't really being abused, as only men abuse women. 14 months later, I was to become homeless, living in my Kia Pregio van. The only services offered me was an anger management course. I tried to maintain regular contact with my sons. A number of times I'd go to the school to pick them up and find a friend's mother was picking them up to go to their place for a weekend. I've since remarried to a very kind and generous lady. 13 years later, I'm still on the disability pension, so I'm much more mobile and active. My ex's abuse continues, such as last year she kicked our 17-year-old son out, telling him to move in with us, so he did. She then proceeded to phone him every 40 minutes and tell him what he was missing out on. Eventually he decided to go back home. His older stepbrother was having a birthday party at an all-you-can-eat restaurant. She had convinced him he should be there for his family and he shouldn't miss out. She was going to pay. Upon arriving home, she said, have you got the money for the restaurant? If you don't, you're not going because I'm not paying for you. This is some of my story. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bennett, and we really appreciate you taking the time to share your experience with us today. Thank you. It's very courageous of you. Thank you. Questions from committee members? Ms. Abigail Boyd.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your submission. I've just got a couple of questions. The first one is, I see the statistics that you've put in here, and I've gone and looked at the core of that, and I could spend some time going through each of the statistics, but I don't think that would be helpful for any of us. So I'll just put this question to you. Why do you think it is that your statistics that you've provided in relation to the numbers of men and women experiencing domestic violence are so different to what is sort of commonly accepted and what we've had submitted to us from experts and academics in this area?
Mr. Andreessen here, I may answer that question. Sorry, there's a lot of noise on the line, but I think I got the gist of the question. Look, we are citing statistics from same reputable sources as our colleagues across the sector, such as the ABS Personal Safety Survey and the AIC's National Homicide Monitoring Program database, and really great studies by organisations like the Australian Institute of Family Studies. And you're welcome to check those statistics. I suspect that the reason that our statistics differ from most of our colleagues in the sector are that most of them are coming from a perspective of supporting women and children as victims. So they're women's support services, women's legal services, or the National Plan to Prevent Violence Against Women and Their Children. And that's fantastic, and we support all of those efforts. But because their concern is primarily with females as victims, the statistics they put forward emphasise females as victims, and then, of course, naturally, our main concern is with male victims, whether they're gay or straight, whether they're in an intimate relationship or broader family networks. And so naturally, the statistics that we emphasise are the ones that, that demonstrate that men make up a substantial proportion of victims. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
It does help. I guess perhaps if you could provide on notice, I'll take you to just one example. At the top of page 5, you say the following data is taken from the most recent ABS Personal Safety Survey, which is from 2016, but then you go on to say it provides an overview of the experience of violence by males and females over the past 12 months. And I don't see how you could get data from 2020 from a 2016 study. So if you could perhaps just show us for these statistics exactly how you got that data. Did you extrapolate it in some way? I think that would be really useful, because looking directly at that 2016 survey, they're not the same numbers. So that would be useful. Sorry, go on.
Thank you for the question. Look, I'm more than happy to provide on notice actual screenshots of the data and highlighting the figures, if that would help. Certainly the calculations in that table in terms of percentages, so for example, the first line which shows violence by an intimate partner, and we put in 35% of that is experienced by males and 65% by females. Those are our own calculations. But the raw numbers of 113,900 males affected in the last 12 months and 211,700 females affected in the last 12 months are easily found in the Excel spreadsheets that make up the Personal Safety Survey. And we're more than happy to provide all of those references on notice for all the stats in our submissions.
So sorry, so that you're saying that over the past 12 months is actually the last 12 months of that 2016 survey, are you?
Correct. So those would have been from, look, that survey is, as you probably know, a very large, expensive survey that takes many, many years to both prepare and to carry out. So I can't give exact figures, but the survey was published in 2016 and was probably taken, the survey was probably undertaken in 2015, 2016, and when people were asked that question, it was the previous 12 months prior to taking the survey, so that probably might be 2014, 2015. But they're the most recent figures. Unfortunately, because of the COVID pandemic, the ABS has had to postpone the planned 2020 Personal Safety Survey, and it's still on the cards, I believe, but it may not be out until this year or maybe even next year.
Okay, thank you. So in the interest of time, I will move on, but if there are any opportunities for you to give us on notice a bit more detail about how the numbers were extracted, that'd be very useful. Just the second thing, you talk about this study from the UK researchers Powney and Graham Keevan from the University of Central Lancashire. Do you have the sort of initial data available to provide to the committee for that study? You've sort of listed it there, but where's your source document for that?
Yes, so the study is literally brand new. The 2,000 or so participants were surveyed sometime in the last 2 months or so, 2 or 3 months. And so those two researchers are still processing, as you can imagine, a considerable amount of data. They were overwhelmed by the amount of people who responded. So the statistics that I've provided in our submission are really brief, the first level of brief analysis that they have published. And so not only do they have to undertake a lot more analysis to produce, to really get that data in a format to be published, but they will then go through the usual peer review process and be published in a journal down the track. So that would be later next year, later this year, or possibly even next year.
Okay.
But I am in touch with those researchers and would be more than happy to connect the committee directly with them if you would like to follow up on any of that data directly.
Thank you. So my final question is just on that. It talks about male victims of coercive control, and it says findings from the Australian participants include the following results. And then the last bullet point there, it said 60% had sex withheld as punishment. Can you explain to us how having sex withheld is a form of coercive control in your view?
Look, I'm not the author of the survey, so I'm making assumptions as you would be. All I have is the same information they provided. But I can imagine that the situation may be something like with the female perpetrator, that they would threaten the male to either undertake behaviour that they wanted them to do, or and the threat would be, if you don't undertake that behaviour, you're not getting any sex. I'm not going to sleep with you. I imagine that's my imagining of the context. The threat of not sleeping with their partner would be used as control in that sort of way.
Would you view that as coercive control? Is that something that instills fear in a person in a way that would result in them sort of having no choice but to do something? Does it take away their liberty and autonomy?
I'm sorry, the line was extremely noisy. Would you mind repeating that question?
Sorry, my question was whether you personally would view that as a form of coercive control, that if somebody chose not to have sex with somebody, that could instill fear or intimidation and lead a person to lose their autonomy and liberty?
Not on its own, but as I'm sure you're quite aware, the patterns of coercive control involve a number of abusive and controlling behaviours over an extended period of time. And so it is probably the case that that man is being abused in multiple other ways. Physical abuse, financial abuse, economic, psychological abuse, threats, intimidation, and that kind of threat about withholding sex would just add to that feeling of that man having no power or no say and being utterly controlled in all aspects of his life.
So, sorry, are you saying a man should have control over whether or not his partner gives him sex? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm suggesting that both partners should have control over that, and both partners should be able to say yes or no as to whether they want to have sex. Pardon me, I'll retract that. Either party should be free to initiate sex, and either party should be free to say no to sex. And that's the kind of control that I mean. Not that either should have control over the other person, but that they should both have personal control and agency in negotiating sex with their partner on an equal basis.
Thank you.
Other questions from members? Trish Doyle.
I want to firstly thank Mr. Craig Bennett for telling your personal story. It's always a tough thing to do. So thank you, Craig.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yep, and to Mr Anderson, I just want to put something to you and then ask a question. Dr Flood has said that the 1 in 3 claim could be described more accurately as a campaign against efforts to address men's violence against women. In light of what you've just outlined then, do you think that all victims, including the minority of male victims, should have access to laws for their protection?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we've always been supportive of all efforts to reduce family violence in the community, and that includes, of course, the majority of cases which involve male perpetrators and female victims. And we believe wholeheartedly that all Australians, no matter their gender, no matter their race, no matter their cultural background, their age, their ethnicity, their level of ability or disability, should have access to laws which protect them from domestic and family violence. Absolutely.
That's all.
Any other questions from members? That being so... Oh, sorry.
yeah.
Thank you. The Honourable Rod Roberts.
I too, Mr Bennett, would like to thank you for your fortitude in coming forward today and giving your story. Appreciate it would be hard to do so we thank you for that. Mr Anderson, to you, I'd like to thank you for your fair and open representation of coercive control and domestic violence as it is. In particular, the chart that you were quizzed over indicates, and you said it in your own verbal evidence earlier, statistically, more women than men are victims, and you haven't resolved from that fact in the evidence you presented. So I thank you for your openness and your transparency, and in particular for bringing to the committee's attention that there are male victims of domestic violence and coercive control as well. It's not a completely gendered offence or situation, and in particular your recommendation that talks about we urge the Joint Select Committee on Coercive Control to consider the needs of all victims of family violence and abuse equally, no matter their gender, geography, social economic status, age, ability, sexual preference, culture, race, religion, when undertaking the important inquiry. Any recommendations made by the inquiry must be applicable equally to victims and perpetrators of all genders and not be affected by gender bias in any respect. So one could not ask for a more fairer and more open submission and statement than that. So I thank you for presenting this to us.
Thanks, Mr Roberts. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Is there anything further you'd like to add? All right. Well, thank you.
I'm sorry, are you us?
Yes. Sorry, Mr Bennett or Mr Anderson?
Oh, no, I wasn't sure if that was directed to us or to the members.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, to you, gentlemen, if there's anything further you'd like to add.
Sorry, the noise was, I didn't hear the question.
All right. Mr Anderson, is there anything further you'd like to say to the committee?
Look, I would just like to add one more thing. I've been listening to the webcast of today's hearing, and I just wanted to expand on some of the statistics that some of the other people gave evidence on during today's hearing. The Relationships Australia representative quoted a statistic that the Safer Pathways program receives 23,000 referrals per year from male victims. And I'd like to just expand on that. I'm not sure if the committee is aware, but Relationships Australia are just one of a number of providers across the state. So since January 2018, 5 local support services have been contracted to provide services to male victims of domestic and family violence in New South Wales. The main 2 providers are Relationships Australia New South Wales and Relationships Australia Canberra, and that would make up the 23,000 referrals as quoted. However, there are three other providers, the Family Centre, Interrelate and Catholic Care Sydney. So the 23,000 referrals is only a proportion of all the referrals that are made each year across New South Wales. We don't have current figures for the total number, but the previous lead agency, which used to take these referrals, which is No to Violence, which you have provided today, received 25,361 referrals for male victims of domestic violence between the 1st of November 2016 and the 30th of June 2017. So that's an average of 38,000 men per year, so 38,000 referrals per year, of which 4,089 were referred to a local support service for case management. So that's an average of 6,100 referrals that made it to case management in a year.
Okay.
And one other statistical point that
Sorry, Mr. Andresen, I might ask if you might if you could kindly provide that to the committee, perhaps in writing. We're just getting a little tight for time. I've got one more question from a member, so I might go to that. If you're happy to receive that information from you in further writing through the committee staff. We have Steph Cook on WebEx. Steph, you had a question.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Well, thank you for appearing today and for your submission. I'm just wondering, in relation to men not seeking advice or support when they are experiencing domestic violence, from a rural perspective, what services are available to men in rural and regional New South Wales for them to turn to?
Mr. Andreessen here. Look, there is very little support, unfortunately. Of course, there are the generic frontline services such as police, GPs, hospitals, etc. are available. But in terms of specialised family violence services, the only service that we are aware of is the 1-800-RESPECT National Telephone Counselling Service and the Men's Line Australia National Telephone Counselling Service. So there are no telephone counselling services provided by the state government to meet that need. And also the referral pathway for the service which I was just talking about, the Safer Pathways program, is only through the police. So people have to report to the police before they can be referred to that pathway, to that program, which would then give them support via Relationships Australia or one of the other providers. So there's very little in terms of support for these men except for those two national phone lines. And those two national phone lines are set up as generic support services for all victims of relationship violence, and so but really specialised in the 1-800-RESPECT phone line is set up for everyone, so they don't necessarily specialise in male victim support, only in all victim support, so it's not necessarily going to be a problem, but it would be great to have a line that specialises just in the issues that males may face. And Men's Line Australia is a generic line for all of men's relationship issues, of which family violence may be one such issue. And so once again, the particular counsellor may or may not have the expertise in dealing with the specific issue that the male is presenting with. And both of those phone lines are set up so that I believe the model is that a victim would call them, and then those support lines would then refer that victim to services on the ground. And those services on the ground for men in New South Wales, and including rural men, are almost non-existent unless that man is prepared to go to the police and they're then being referred on to the Safer Pathways program.
Thank you for elaborating. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I appreciate your further information. That will conclude this session. If members have further questions, we may send those to you in writing. Would you be happy to receive those and provide written responses to those, which, if you are, will form part of your evidence and will be made public also? Could you just indicate whether you'd be happy to receive those, Mr. Anderson, Mr. Bennett?
Of course.
Thank you very much. That concludes this session and concludes the public hearing for today. Can I thank members and all witnesses who have attended and assisted the committee today. We do appreciate your submissions and your time. Again, if anything raises issues for you, you can contact 1800-RESPECT, 1800-737-732, or the New South Wales Domestic Violence Line, 1800-656-463, or, of course, the Men's Referral Service, 1300-766-491. We have completed our hearing of evidence today, and I'd like to thank all of the committee members for their attendance and assistance, and in particular our long-suffering Hansard staff. I'm sure there will be many written submissions provided to you. Thank you. It's always a challenge with WebEx and telephone hearings, but we're very grateful for the great work you do. And of course, our wonderful committee staff for their excellent assistance. I won't name them all just yet, but thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. We will be resuming tomorrow at 9 o'clock for the 5th day of hearing. Thank you.